We're running a poll. Should the US Second Amendment on the right to bear arms be repealed? A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter, on YouTube, on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, or on the YouTube community poll. Many thousands have already voted, and the result is not perhaps what you would imagine, given the regular, certainly weekly, oftentimes daily toll of mass murder that takes place in the United States. The question of banning weapons is otiose, in my opinion. It cannot be done. There are more illegal weapons in the United States than there are legal, and there are 100 million legal arms, maybe more than that. That statistic may be out of date. So disarming Americans is practically impossible in any case. I've got to tell you, if I was voting in this poll, I'd be voting no. If I lived in a country like the United States, as violent, as dysfunctional, as quite frankly horrific, divided across multiple axes from top to bottom, with a tyrannical government, with a tyrannical bipartisan Congress, I wouldn't give up my weapon either. But you can have your say. You can call the show even if you want to speak volubly about that. Of course, there was plenty of weapons around in 1945 on this day, and indeed on the preceding ones. The Red Army lost hundreds of thousands of casualties just in the battle for Berlin itself, but they were determined not just to crush Nazi Germany, not just to secure its capitulation, but to secure its entire destruction, because that fascist tyranny had visited almost 100 million casualties on the world. Unconditional surrender and the capture or killing of the Nazi hierarchy was the minimum requirement for the invading Red Army. I'm reading the epic work, I wish I'd brought it to show you, of my late and great friend and former parliamentary colleague, Alan Clark, simply titled Barbarossa. Alan used to quite effortlessly turn out these epic works of extraordinary scholarship, which shone a light onto conflict so bright that you could almost see the blood seeping into the frozen ground. In the case of Barbarossa, he wrote another great book called Donkeys, about the lions that were led by donkeys in the trenches of the First World War. I commend both to you. But because I'm reading it, and because I have just been in Germany, I am acutely conscious of the significance of these few days in May. You'll recall the epic picture of the banner of victory being draped over the destroyed Reichstag. I visited it, nowadays called the Bundestag, just a day or two ago. Just 2 blocks from there, Hitler was still alive. His Hitler Youth and his most extreme SS zealots were holding out, still fighting, gun to gun, knife to knife, teeth to teeth with the invading Russian army. This regime, which had cost the lives of 26 million Russian people, 20 million Chinese people through its alliance with Japanese fascism, the people who died in Africa from the forces of Italian fascism. This axis of evil had to be crushed, but nobody could crush it except the Red Army. The Russians were the only people who could have destroyed this bestial tyranny and dictatorship. And just think about this. It is therefore the case that if not for the Russians, the entire world might still be under the jackboot of fascism. Just think about that. Of course, no Jew would be left alive in the world, probably no Slav either, no disabled person, no homosexual person, no communist, no socialist, no trade unionist, no dissident would have been permitted to live outside the concentration camps, maybe even outside the gas chamber. That's an unrepayable, irredeemable debt that humanity owes to the Russian people. And yet how quickly it was all forgotten. How quickly Western media and propaganda fixed the Russians who saved us from fascism, fixed them as the next enemy. And how many decades, all the decades of my young life, in fact, until 1990, it was an anti-Soviet demon against which we were ranged. Since 1990, despite the brief interregnum of Russia lying drunk on the floor and having its pockets picked by globalized capitalism and the buzzards, the vultures, who sought to feast upon its great national treasures, both industrial and mineral, that brief interregnum was ended on this day 23 years ago, when Vladimir Putin became the president of Russia for the first time. They hate Vladimir Putin in the way that they did not hate the drunkard Boris Yeltsin. And the reason, if you think about it, is obvious. Unfortunately, far too many people never think about it. Because Putin lifted Russia off the floor, dried it out, dusted it down, put it back on its feet, put it back to work, banned the vodka, restricted the drunken stupor into which so many Russians had fallen at the end of the communist period and in that aforementioned interregnum, rebuilt its strength, rebuilt its international prestige, so that all roads lead to Moscow now, including the roads from Beijing, the world's greatest industrial power, soon to be the world's greatest economy. Russia is now at the heart of the world island, the Eurasian heartland, which is carrying already all before it in economic, military, and political developments. That's why they hate Vladimir Putin. That's why they invent propaganda stories about him, as outlandish as the bayoneting of babies and the Belgian nuns in the propaganda of the First World War, as untrue as the Viagra given out by Gaddafi to Libyan forces so that they could rape women using rape as a weapon of war, as fictitious as the Iraqis unplugging babies from incubators in the hospitals of Kuwait and carrying the incubators back home to Iraq. A litany of more than a century of lying has been the hallmark of Western media in its servile service to the war machine, to the dictates of the big powers in our countries. That's why they tell you Putin's had a heart attack, a brain hemorrhage, why he's got cancer in every available organ, why he's got a body double, why he might be even dead. That's why they tell you that, because they hate him and they fear him. They hate him because he has put Russia back where it belongs as a great European and Asiatic society, and because they realize that he is winning. We'll be talking more. I've got a short film to show you about my time in Berlin. We'll talk more about that later. I want to turn to the coronation that took place in London yesterday. Now look, I'm in second place to nobody when it comes to acknowledging the brilliance of the British in these great state occasions. Few, if any, can match our taste for the big day. Few can match the resplendence of our surroundings, the cityscape of our capital city, at least in a square mile or so around Westminster, Buckingham Palace, the Mall, and so on. I'm one of the very few people on the left that enjoys the Edinburgh military tattoo. I like pomp and circumstance, even if I don't like the cause to which it is devoted. So I have no wish to rain on the King's Parade that took place yesterday. I have no wish to laugh at the millions of my compatriots who thoroughly enjoyed the day, those that were there and those that watched on television. I understand their feelings, and heaven knows it has been a long time since we have had anything at all to feel happy about as a country, as a people. But I cannot forswear to comment on the venality of the individual for whom all this was yesterday done. The venality of this adulterous tax dodger, this man who almost literally drove Princess Diana to her death in a Paris underpass. This man who conducted an illicit affair not only throughout his own marriage, but also through her own marriage, are now the King and Queen of Britain. And most particularly for the purposes of this monologue, he is the head of the Church of England. Now, I'm not going to turn this into a religious war, limited though my admiration for the Church of England is. I'm not going to turn this into a diatribe against a church founded on the balls of Henry VIII to facilitate his adultery. I'm not going to talk about the Church of England, the Anglican Communion with the swinging women vicars and the silk knickers on many a priest. I'm not going to talk about any of that. But I'm bound to make reference to an extraordinary thing that happened to me this afternoon. I caught out one of those swinging priests, Father Calvin Robinson, something of a figure on GB News, something of a figure on Twitter. I had long followed him, quite often agreed with him, regularly retweeted him. But I caught him out on that most ancient of vices, hypocrisy, and drew attention to it in a sharp, crisp rejoinder. Robinson then made a very big mistake of accusing me of a lack of erudition. Now, I may not have your fancy, expensive education, Father, but I am not lacking in erudition, and there are not many people who will watch this who will be in any doubt about that. You couldn't stand the heat, Father, so you blocked me on Twitter and then accused me of mocking God. Me mocking God. Nobody in the entire United Kingdom speaks about God to more people almost every week than me, and I certainly include your minuscule audience. I wasn't mocking God, Father. I was mocking you. Robinson, in terms, to please the GB News crowd and the anti-globalist people to whom he's normally preaching, of accusing the now King Charles anointed of being a scoundrel. And that had the benefit of being true. Father Robinson drew attention to his unsavory friends, and that is also undeniably true, from Jimmy Savile to Klaus Schwab and every other Istandism, every other faddist, every other net zero denizen, every other climate change hoaxer, every other compulsory vaxxer, and all the rest. That is indeed King Charles. And Father Robinson opened with that. But he went on in the same tweet to say, but long may he reign over us. We don't get, he said, to pick our kings, which is, of course, precisely the point. Actually, we're lucky because it could well have been King Andrew anointed by a two-girl Thai massage yesterday in Westminster Abbey. We don't get to pick our kings, so implicitly to God, Father Robinson said that he wished that God would allow, facilitate this man he just denounced as a scoundrel to rule over us for long. That's called hypocrisy, you see. It's called trying to ride two horses at the same time. If the first part is true, the second part cannot be true. And as for the later, once I'd been blocked, allegation that I was mocking God, let me make this point to you, Father Robinson. Jesus would have laughed at your lack of intellectuality, your lack of logic, your lack of theology, because people who believe in God don't just have a right to reject unjust kings, they have a duty, a responsibility to reject unjust kings, kings who will visit misery upon their people. And the only way to do that is to declare solemnly that this man is an illegitimate king. He's illegitimate on multiple levels that I don't have time to adumbrate. He's illegitimate because there is no commandment he has not regularly broken, with not a cent of penitence about it. He's illegitimate because he does not wish the best for those that he rules over, whether short or long. He is illegitimate because of his personal conduct. He is illegitimate as the head of a church, even one formed on the balls of Henry VIII. There is much more I could say, but I note that I'm running out of time. And so I wish only to return to the first words that I spoke. In the United States of America, for whom my heart bleeds, the great people of America are in the midst of a social, societal, cultural collapse. The 7 people who were murdered just before I came on air in Texas followed 8 people who were murdered there yesterday by a gunman with an automatic weapon. No day goes by without mass, internal, civil violence amongst the Americans. No neighborhood, no street, sometimes no tenement block, maybe even no house is free from the multiple vices that afflict American society. I genuinely mean my heart goes out to them. I have no wish to see the American people suffer. I wish with all my heart that the people of America can fix their society. But what I will never accept or even understand is how people who live in societies that are not yet at least like that, wants, begs this country of the United States of America to be their leader, to be their father, to give them orders, which they then faithfully carry out, even if those orders are so self-harming that no one can walk in any capital city in Europe today. And I've been in multiple capital cities in Europe over these last few weeks. They're all falling. Paris is falling. London has fallen. Berlin has fallen. These societies are rapidly going to the dogs in order to carry out aggressive military, economic, and political warfare against the 2 most successful countries and societies in the world today. As the Americans would say, go figure indeed. Fasten your seatbelts. This is the mother of all talk shows.